Hi, and welcome back to episode 4 of Where Did I Go? A podcast for women in the messy middle of modern motherhood.
We're seeing a shift in understanding motherhood as also ambitious, right? As the choice to make time for your family, the choice to do something different can be equally ambitious, and that caregiving is work, right? That is not stepping out of work. It is maybe stepping out of paid work, but it is still work.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have ambitious plans for your family. You want to raise them in a way that is good, right? That is ambitious, to not just do the bare minimum when it comes to parenting, but to throw yourself into it, to give it all you've got, to raise healthy, well-adjusted children. That requires a level of ambition.
I've started playing with this metaphor that I've been talking about of ambition as a web rather than a ladder, right? So when we think of ambition as a ladder, it's straight, it's narrow, the rungs are evenly spaced, right? We know exactly how to climb to the top. It's straightforward. There's not actually room for everybody on the ladder, right? It's thin. There's only a couple people get to make it to the top. And the kind of unspoken part of the ladder metaphor is that you're either on it or you're off of it.
What shifts for women, especially mums, when they start seeing their career or their ambition as this web that they get to navigate however they like?
It's like almost like an exhale. There's some freedom in it, right? It's like, I don't have to work quite so hard or work against myself, because it's not about working less hard. It is about working differently. I can think of one client who really kind of discovered an ambition for service work and who, now runs a massive, it's because she took the time to look inward and figure out, like, what am I ambitious for? We have to kind of have some space to ask those questions. And that's so much of what I do in my work, right, is give that space to women to figure this out and do so in a way that has zero judgment, right? And really, really opens to all of the possibilities.
So today we've got a really good one. I'm talking to Dr. Anne Welsh, who is, brace yourself, a clinical psychologist, coach, consultant, writer, and mum. She's going to be walking us through how our ambition shifts when we become mothers. Not because we stop wanting things, but because life starts pulling us in different directions. And how that can actually be a really good thing. In this episode, Anne shares her brilliant way of thinking about ambition as a web instead of a ladder. When ambition is a ladder, you either go up or you're falling off. But when it's a web, you can move sideways, change directions, or pause without feeling like you failed. We talk about how motherhood often makes us reassess what we're really working towards, whether that's more meaning, more money, more space, more time, or just a bit of breathing room. This conversation is really for anyone who's ever thought, I used to be so driven. Where did that go? Hi, Anne. It's so great to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here.
Okay, so to kick things off, I would love just to hear a bit more about your story. Like, talk me through what's the last few years looked like for you.
Sure. I mean, the short version is the last few years has been fairly busy because I have 4 kids and we are in the thick of the big kid and into teen years. There's a lot of driving people places and activities, but slightly more zoomed out version. I started my career as a clinical psychologist and I've been doing that for a very long time. But I found, early on in my career, I had children. And after my second, I was working at Harvard, and I just hit this point where I said, I can't do what's being asked of me. I cannot full-time work with this pretty acute caseload and then also show up for my kids the way I want to at the end of the day. I can't be the clinician and the mom that I want to be under this framework. And so I asked to go part-time, and the answer was a pretty quick no. That was too logistically complicated, and essentially there's a lot of other people waiting for your job, so you can take it or leave it. So I jumped into entrepreneurship, which I never expected, and I started my own practice, and I've been doing that since then, and it's grown almost like a 5th kid in some ways, right? Yeah. So I actually ended up having 2 more kids. And in addition to my therapy practice, which is all perinatal mental health, so postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, I also do executive coaching for working moms. I run a working moms coaching group. And then I also do consulting with organizations to make workplaces better for working parents. So I kind of think of my career now as like a wheel with a lot of different spokes, all centered on helping working moms.
Amazing. And I think like this, well, yeah, I mean, the story that you've just outlined of being in a situation where you're very quickly figuring out you can't make all the ends meet, something's got to give, and then being met with a response from your employer or whoever it is that you need to kind of make some changes with, that no, change is not actually possible, and kind of having your hand forced to make a change that you might not be ready for. I'm hearing a lot that that is a common reality for a lot of people in these early phases of motherhood.
Yeah. And I think what drives me so much is that I was really privileged, right? I could leave. I had a spouse that also had healthcare benefits, and, we could take that leap financially and see if I could make a go of it. But not everybody is in that position, nor does everybody want to be an entrepreneur, right? I think sometimes that's the, we're sold this story of like, just leave and do your own thing. But it's not a journey that everybody wants to take on. It's a very different way of working. And I want to make it so that women have access to lots of different choices, right? That they can stay if they want to, or they can leave if that is what serves them, or they can choose to take a pause, right? And walk away from work for a period of caregiving and then have it as an option to return to later. Like, all of those are really valid, wonderful choices. And I want women to have access to all of those things.
Yeah. And I think there is so much in just not even knowing what your options are, especially if, you're already navigating early motherhood. That's like a lot to wrap your head around, to also then go and navigate what choices can I make professionally at that time when you're so acutely like sleep deprived and emotionally all over the place and just figuring out so many different things. It's like, it's not the time, is it? So I think one of the things I've really started to realize is how much so many of the conversations about motherhood need to happen way before you're almost even thinking about having children. You kind of need to prepare yourself way ahead of time. There's lots of things that you should factor into that decision to have children. And it's kind of like those things are all hidden at the moment. And then as soon as you find yourself holding a little baby and having to make some big decisions, you don't actually know what to do.
Yes, totally. And I think that's what makes working parenthood so hard in particular, is you are doing a double transition, right? You are going from woman to mother, or person to parent. And that's a huge transition. And big, giant transitions take a long time, but you pretty quickly layer on to that then, especially here in the States, working person to working parent. That's a whole separate transition. And I think what happens is kind of, we don't anticipate how hard that's going to be, or kind of how earth-shattering it might feel. We don't have systems set to support it. And women just kind of, it's almost like a freeze response, right? If you think of kind of your traditional stress responses, you fight or you can freeze. And I think a lot of women get to freeze. And then that's when we see them leaving a little bit later, right? I think you see women coming back from leave and then leaving 18 months later, right? And I think it's because of this experience of, you come out of that freeze, you come out of that haze, and you're like, oh, whoa, maybe this isn't me. And I don't want what I have right now, and I've got to do something differently.
Yeah, I can really identify with that. And you must see also quite a strong relationship between that's almost a pressure cooker situation, isn't it? Lots of things happening at the same time. And then your clinical practice is in perinatal health. And there must be a relationship between those two things.
Totally. And so a couple things, one is we think of postpartum mood disorders as just depression, but it's not, right? You can have postpartum anxiety, postpartum OCD, in rare cases, postpartum psychosis, right? There's a lot of different postpartum mental health issues that can arise. The other, I think, misnomer or myth about it is that it shows up right away. And that's not always the case, right? It really, from a diagnostic perspective, it can be any time in the first year. Some of us in the field even say kind of once postpartum, always postpartum, that it can really show up almost at any point. And I find that my practice in particular is more often postpartum anxiety than depression, and more often after the return to work, 6 months, 9 months down the road of, I can't sleep. I am constantly on edge. I'm irritable all the time, right? I'm struggling with mom rage. All of these things that people don't even understand to be kind of part of the maternal mental health picture, and trying to wrap their heads around like, what, I don't feel like myself, and I don't understand how to get back there. And workplaces don't get that either, right? Because nobody at work is thinking, oh, this could be a postpartum mental health issue. They're just stressed, or moms can't handle it, or whatever the myth is that the workplace holds.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is so much taboo wrapped around any kind of mental health discussion when it comes to motherhood, because you're supposed to thrive, you're supposed to flourish, you're supposed to be, this in this golden era where everything is amazing because you've just given birth and this is your purpose as a woman to sort of like mother. And for so many women, for myself included, the reality of being in a situation where I felt a lot of anxiety and a lot of sadness and a lot of confusion was really disconcerting. Like I didn't know what to do with that. And I also felt like I couldn't talk to anyone about any of those things because it was shameful.
Yeah, it's funny. I was one of the first in my kind of group of friends to have a kid, and my oldest just turned 16. So the conversations have moved forward quite a bit since then. But at the time, nobody was talking about motherhood being hard, even like that just wasn't in the kind of common parlance. And so when it was hard, when, we had days where I was crying and the baby was crying and nobody knew what to do, I just thought I must be the worst mom ever.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to make of it because I had studied the transition to motherhood from a psychological perspective in my own research. I had been babysitting since I was like 12. I had been around kids. I thought it wouldn't be so hard and nobody warned me. Yeah. And I found myself then having conversations with all of my friends when they were expecting their first to just say, you're going to have a day. And you're going to think you're the worst mom in the world, and the baby will be crying all day, and you will be crying all day. Your spouse might be crying all day, and it's going to be okay. And it's because this is hard, and here's all the reasons that it's hard. And call me when that happens, because I don't want you to feel the way I felt of layering shame on top of that and saying, this must be a me problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And having that voice, that other perspective in your network some way or another is just so important. Like if you can't seek help in that period of time because you almost can't think straight, can you, when you're in the middle of this messy postpartum, whatever it is, even if you're not, on the clinical scale of having anxiety or depression, like even in the best case scenario, it's still confusing. It's hard to know what you need, and you kind of need other people in your circle to hold out that hand or give you that other story to tell yourself, so that when it feels really hard, you can remind yourself, hey, this is not me. This is the reality of it's like this for everyone, basically.
I always say, like, it's hard because it's hard, not because you're doing it wrong, right? Exactly. And that's like the message I want people to hold on to. And it's beautiful too, right? I mean, I think sometimes we get really caught up in the motherhood is hard language and miss that it's beautiful. Yeah. So I always make sure to share that too. But it's two things, right? Two things can be true.
Totally. And I think that was one of the things that I personally really struggled with in the phase where I was really struggling with that transition to motherhood. I, at the same time, felt like the most amazed and wondrous and joyful that I'd ever felt in my life, because, my son was he just like cracked me open, and I was experiencing this sensation of love that I'd never felt before. So I was feeling all of those things, but I was also feeling desperately low at some points. And it was really hard for me to reconcile that those two things could coexist, that it was absolutely fine to be in those two spaces, sometimes at the same time. So you have talked a little bit about your life before children. Like what did ambition look like for you in that phase of life, pre-kids?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I was pretty darn ambitious. I had already made a big career pivot, but I was basically operating in ladder climbing mode. So I had kind of climbed the ladder, if you will, to get into medical school, and got in, and then realized, whoa, this is not actually what I want. I want something else. I'm not quite sure what that is yet, but I'm going to figure it out. Mm-hmm. And then kind of quickly just got on another ladder, and this time to the degree in clinical psychology, a doctorate, the wrong kind of doctor, according to my parents, right? Who were both medical doctors, but, got my doctorate, landed the job at Harvard, right? I just climbed another ladder, and it wasn't until I left Harvard and I was kind of like, who does this? Right? Who walks away from this again? And I walked away because of my kids. That's when I started really shifting. What does it mean to be ambitious? Because I don't feel less ambitious. I still really value my career and want to make a difference and make an impact. But here I am doing it in a dramatically different way without the accolades or the kind of external validation that I was used to. And that was a wonderful place of growth. But it was also, again, like parenting, very, very hard to kind of tolerate that shift when I didn't have anyone that could name it or talk about it or voice that with me.
Yeah, you touched upon something really interesting there, this idea of the validation from others that you're doing the right thing. I think often when you do the thing that is right for you, certainly after having children, it can be on paper a really weird choice. You know, you might be taking a pay cut or a less senior role, or I've certainly found myself in situations where I've almost sheepishly been like almost apologizing for the changes that I was making professionally. They felt so right to me inside, but I couldn't really articulate why they were right for us as a family. And there was a sense of, okay, that's a interesting choice. Like, yeah, you know, and I think that can be a struggle if you're already feeling a bit insecure about the choices you're making, to not have the sort of acceptance or the encouragement from others, or worse, actually, to have that insecurity reinforced by others. That can be, that's really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, sometimes that old advice of, well, just who cares what everybody thinks, that doesn't really work, right? We're social creatures. Not only are we socialized to care what other people think, it's built in biologically, right? We are a tribal species. We depend on groups to survive. And so when everyone else in your group or that you encounter says, that's a bad idea, it's going to cause anxiety. That's normal. And, right, again, back to the two things are true, and it can still be the right choice. And you can find the internal kind of grounding and compass to do it anyway, and take steps forward in that direction. But I do think there's also this piece where, you know, we're seeing a shift in understanding motherhood as also ambitious, right? As the choice to make time for your family, the choice to do something different can be equally ambitious, and that caregiving is work, right? That is not stepping out of work. It is maybe stepping out of paid work, but it is still work.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have ambitious plans for your family. Like you want to raise them in a way that is good, right? That is ambitious, to not just do the bare minimum when it comes to parenting, but to throw yourself into it, to give it all you've got to raise healthy, well-adjusted children. That requires a level of ambition. And yeah, you're right. It kind of falls back to the lack of kind of prestige we give to caregiving. Like it's just not a thing that we value. So making a choice to focus on caregiving is perceived as an unvalued choice.
Yep. Yeah. It feels small and yet it's huge, right? And I think as women in particular, we have a complicated relationship with that, right? Because we are so socialized to look outward and to look at others for approval, whether it is the report card that, you know, I certainly got when I was a kid of like, Anne is a pleasure to have in class, code word for Anne follows all the rules and does exactly what she's supposed to do, right? And that gets reinforced over and over and over and over again, right? Women, and then particular mothers, are supposed to serve everybody else's needs first and take care of everybody else and put themselves at the bottom of the list. And so to turn inward is particularly revolutionary, really, for women and for mothers. You're going against the grain a lot to be able to do it. And yet when you do, it's life-changing for you and for your kids, right? That's usually the angle that I feel like helps people start to do it, right? If I do this for me, I model it for my kids and I give them the freedom to turn inward rather than look outward for validation.
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually something that's come up in previous episodes, how mothers sometimes need that little nudge that, you know, this is not selfish, like it has a value for the other people that you're trying to put first. And that sometimes that's the final little nudge you need to make the decision or the step that is required to make big change. So You've kind of started talking about how this idea of ambition changed for you after motherhood. So how did you develop that idea? What has ambition become for you in your practice as both a clinical psychologist, but also in your coaching experience?
I've started playing with this metaphor that I've been talking about of ambition as a web rather than a ladder, right? So when we think of ambition as a ladder, It's straight, it's narrow. The rungs are evenly spaced, right? We know exactly how to climb to the top. It's straightforward. There's not actually room for everybody on the ladder, right? It's thin. There's only a couple people get to make it to the top. And the kind of unspoken part of the ladder metaphor is that you're either on it or you're off of it. And off of it is failure, right? Like you might as well not exist if you're stepped off the ladder. And I think, I always use the examples of law firms as a good understanding of this, right? Where it's kind of up or out culture. Either you get promoted to the next level or you are asked to leave. There is no choice to stay other than to keep climbing. But I find that with this model, most people that make it to the top actually aren't all that happy. And a lot of people get there and they're like, what did I even do this for? This doesn't actually feel any better. I still feel like I'm somehow not enough. And what I encourage people to do is almost envision like zooming out into space and look at that ladder and recognize that it is a teeny tiny part of a giant web, right? So like picture, if you've taken your kids to the playground and they have those webs and it's like knotted ropes and, there's kids that are climbing all over the place really fast and there are kids that are sitting on it like chilling, having a snack, resting. There's someone probably hanging upside down. There's someone climbing on the backside of it, right? Every kind of movement is welcome. And you can go in all sorts of different directions. And it's all part of being on this web. That's what I want people to think of as ambition, right? There is room to rest and have your snack. There's room to zoom really, really fast. You can totally change directions. You can do things that other people view as upside down because of where they're standing, right? There is always space to pivot and make different choices and then make different choices again. And when we think of ambition that way, we never have to lose it. We just get to change directions. And then there's not that complicated relationship with, am I enough, right? Like you just are on the web as we all are, and we're all kind of hanging out and having fun. It's a much more playful way to think about it and a more creative space in which to grow.
I love that. I've personally been I always feel the need to call out the jungle gym-esque nature of my career whenever I apply for a new job, because it is very non-linear. And it's something that has been pointed out to me during some interview processes where people have asked me, like, why are you so all over the place almost? And it's for me, it's just felt like I've made natural choices that have met the needs and interests I've had at different moments in time. And it felt okay when I was younger, and you're kind of, nothing really matters. You can make changes and you can pivot as much as you like, and you're in an exploration phase. As I've got older and both more senior, if you like, but also kind of felt the pressure of needing to prove a certain thing because I'm X many years into my career now. I need to prove that I've grown or increased my capacity and my potential professionally, because there's been that pressure both externally and internally. I've felt way more insecure about the fact that I've had this web-esque professional history versus a more linear ladder, because I guess the ladder is easier to understand. The web requires some abstracted thinking from others to understand where the potential lies in all of the different skill sets you've developed by doing things in a less direct way.
Yeah. I think there's maybe a kernel of truth to that, but in terms of the perception of others, but I also think there's maybe room for storytelling, right? So, I think, what is the job of therapy or even coaching, right? A lot of it is stories. What are the stories we are telling ourselves about our past, and what are the stories we are telling ourselves about our future? I think when you think about the web, you can still look backwards and tell a connected story of how you got from A to Z. Yeah. Right? I mean, as I was making each pivot and each choice, I had no idea, right, where I was headed. I didn't know, here's the linear path of my career. And I really did want one. I will say I am a type A person, right? When people told me as a 20-something, like, oh, careers are circuitous and there's serendipity, I was like, no, I don't want to leave anything to chance. Give me a plan, right? Guess what? Kids don't follow plans, right? Babies don't do plans. Whatever you had planned is going to go awry. And that was an adjustment for me. But I think I can look back and connect a lot of the dots. Yeah. I didn't have that moving forward. It was like kind of cutting a new trail in the woods a bit. And so I think when we are feeling like, oh, I don't I don't know that anyone can make sense of this. You get to make sense of it. You get to look back and say, okay, well, what is the story? How do I want to frame this when I'm applying for a new job or a role? And how am I going to demonstrate all of these choices as growth opportunities and then providing me with tools that I'm going to bring into this new workplace?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that gets to be a really fun exercise as well. That reflective storytelling is something I think we so rarely do actually for ourselves. You might do it in the professional context, but for yourself, how often do you think about your story and how you tell it? And so I totally agree. I've done a lot of soul searching in that space of like, what is the red thread? Because there clearly is one. You know, you are driven by interests and desires and passions. And yes, they may evolve over time, but there is that guiding light that is your inner kind of truth that drives everything, and bringing that to the surface and giving it some language and making that the part of you that you sell, not necessarily the bits you can put on a CV that are about, you know, specific skill sets, but just a broader journey. That can be a really captivating process to go through, I think.
I think you're right. We don't always reflect and look back, and yet it's incredibly powerful. Even if you look back and you're like, I still don't quite know, just the exercise of like grappling with it opens up the possibility of accessing the story, right? When we even attempt to put language to it, our brains start kind of working on it in the background. And then you'll have that aha moment in the shower where you're like, that's the thread, or that's a part of the thread. I don't know what the whole thing is, but I've made that connection. And then I've made another connection and kind of started to put it together over time.
Do you have any kind of specific exercises that you guide people through in trying to tease out that story?
I mean, with the story, a lot of times it is in the telling to another person and letting them listen and kind of suggest connections. But the other exercise that I do with a lot of clients, and I do it as part of my group program too, is like, I call it's a silly name, but I call it a closet clean out for your identity, right? Because I think everyone can kind of visualize this experience. And I use a lot of metaphor in my work because it gives us, you know, metaphors sometimes allow us to circumvent the language part of the brain, right? And think visually. And that's a different type of thinking. And so what I mean by the closet clean out is, right, like think about you're going to go clean out your closet. Like you've got a whole day for this project and you open the closet doors and you literally put everything on the bed. And then you're going to label all of it. Where did I get it? So what I mean by this with identity is to say, what are all of the expectations I'm carrying around of myself? And where did I pick those up? Right. So maybe that is from my grad school PI, and that's my mom, and that is from dad, and that's from Instagram, and that one's from Aunt Susan, and like all of it, label it all, every single expectation of what you are supposed to do and what you're supposed to be. And most people find even in this process, they're like, well, wait, there's like 300 different things and they're actually all contradicting. And I'm like, yeah, that's how this works. Like you can't, and that's why you feel stressed all the time, because you can't be all of the things when they're in opposing directions. Then you pick which ones actually resonate for you. And again, when you have the visual of all your clothes on your bed, you can think about, well, does this fit? Am I keeping this sweater because I think I like the color, but it's actually really itchy and I never wear it? Okay, then get rid of that. If it makes you uncomfortable, it's not the right one. And so it's really figuring out what fits for me. Where's my voice underneath all of this? And you only keep the ones that fit. And then we can work through, okay, well, what else are we going to add in? What else have you, is really you that you haven't tried yet, or you haven't thought about, or has been kind of brushed under the rug or whatever. But you really have to kind of clear away all that noise first to access that voice underneath. And it sounds really simple as I describe it. It's incredibly hard to do in reality.
I can imagine, because even just sort of being able to pick all of the things or just identify all of the things that are in your mental closet that's really hard to do, isn't it?
Yes, totally. And I find what happens is a lot of times we'll do it initially and, we'll do it with some writing and talking, and then it kind of is iterative, right?
And the great thing about that exercise is that it's something you get to do again and again and again as you change over the course of your career. Because like whose wardrobe looks the same as it did when they were 18? No one's. So it makes sense that you do it for your own identity as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's an important part of the motherhood story too, is that, you're not meant to stay the same person, right? Like, thank God we aren't all the same people that we were when we were 20, right? You know, like it's appropriate. We keep developing and growing and learning throughout our entire lives. And so, of course, motherhood is going to be a part of that. And even as your motherhood shifts and changes, you may change, right? It was, I have 4 kids. They are all within essentially 6 years. There was a time where I lived in a preschool, right? Like where that was just my whole world was, infants and toddlers everywhere. Now my world looks really different, right? I still have 4 kids. There's still sometimes a lot of noise in the house, but I can actually leave the house and leave them all at the house and they're going to be fine, right? I don't need to necessarily get a babysitter if I'm going to the grocery store for milk. And that's a huge difference in what my work week can look like, actually. It really is. And so to recognize what it is right now is going to change. Your motherhood will change. Your career will change. And all of this is really, really normal, right? We want to be able to adapt and shift and grow as external circumstances move.
Oh, I love that. I love a good mental metaphor to just sort of make sense of something that can feel quite complicated. But then when you say it like that, it's like, oh yeah, it is. I mean, not that the exercise is simple, but it is as simple as deciding this isn't good for me anymore. I don't use it. I don't want it. I'm going to put that somewhere else because it's making my own experience of life more confusing. And what I need right now is clarity.
Yeah, completely.
So from your experience, what shifts for women, and especially mums, when they start seeing their career or their ambition as this web that they get to navigate however they like?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big shift is it's like almost like an exhale, right? Yeah. There's some freedom in it, right? It's like, I don't have to work quite so hard or work against myself, right? It's because it's not about working less hard. It is about working differently. Sometimes they find that there's actually more energy and more excitement for work. And certainly that's been my experience, right? Of when I choose things that are really aligned and fit for me, I don't run out of energy in the same way, right? Like I sometimes joke that I'm like the toddler that doesn't want to take a nap. When I have something I'm excited about or I'm interested in, right? It's like, oh, I don't want to sleep. I don't want to pause. I don't want to rest. I want to, keep going because this is really, really fascinating or I'm excited about it. And I know that I still need to, right? And I make myself, but as opposed to that feeling of like just drudgery of like, oh, yeah, I just don't want to do this or I'm so tired all the time, right? And so there's like a freedom. There's, I think sometimes a playfulness. Really the shift, and this is something that I talk a lot about in my book, is moving from this kind of striving that feels fear-based, that is really unhealthy, of like, I have to do all the things because otherwise bad things will happen, right? Or someone will find out I'm not perfect, or everything will fall apart, or whatever, to striving because I'm excited. And I'm striving because this is something I'm really wanting to move towards. And when we're striving because of fear, there is no room for rest. It's just like, it's that ladder. I've got to get to the top. I've got to make it to the other side. Then I can rest. But what happens is as soon as you get to that goal, you move the goalpost and there's a new thing and you never actually get to rest. Yeah. When it's in this healthy striving bucket, right? It's like, I'm enjoying the process of getting there. So there is no rush and I can pause and I can take a break and I can come back and I can move. Right. And so it's that freedom. It's not less. It's not smaller even. It's actually more expansive, really.
Yeah, I get that. And I think this idea of being powered by choice and not powered by obligation or a sense of obligation, that's almost like an ignition, isn't it? To kind of get you going in a way there's true power in doing something because you really believe in it. I can definitely feel that when I'm kind of in the flow on a project or doing something at work that just feels so meaningful. I'm exactly like you. I don't feel the need to stop. I get energy from that.
I've seen it play out with a lot of clients too. I can think of one client who really kind of discovered an ambition for service work and who, now runs a massive nonprofit and is very, very busy, but is thriving because she's doing what she feels called to do and loves. But it's because she took the time to look inward and figure out, like, what am I ambitious for? We have to kind of have some space to ask those questions. And that's so much of what I do in my work, right, is give that space to women to figure this out and do so in a way that has zero judgment, right? And really, really opens to all of the possibilities.
Yeah. And something I wanted to touch on was you talk a lot about giving yourself permission to place value on different things at different times. Like sometimes you want to chase a higher salary. Sometimes time is the most valuable thing that you're ambitious for. Sometimes it can be anything, right? Like, it could be connection, it could be meaning. So many different things drive us at different times, and we can be ambitious for different things. And I mean, honestly, that was actually quite revelationary for me, because you sort of are hardwired to think ambition is seniority and money and nothing else. And I really like how you unpack that and actually say, no, you can be ambitious for a multitude of different things. What matters is what you need right now. But even just reframing that whole question it requires a lot of unwiring.
Completely, right? I mean, and part of that is living in a capitalist society, right? Where these things are kind of part of how you demonstrate success. But I think it's just baked in, right? It is baked in from cultural messages, sometimes from familiar messages, even the school system that there is that, get to the top of the class, get all the A's, et cetera, et cetera. And I've certainly watched this, with my own children as they go through school, even in a school district who really values social emotional learning, who does programming on emotional development and talking about our feelings. And it's wonderful. There's still a system that says, hey, get an A, get into college, et cetera, climb the ladder, right? And so we have to kind of work against all of that to recognize that it's not that you can't be ambitious for money or power or title. Those are options on the web. There's just other options too.
Yeah.
That can feel just as good, just as successful. And again, you can change your mind, right? Like, you don't have to only go after one of them and pick something for the rest of your life. I can say, when my kids were little, back in those preschool days, a lot of my ambition was time home with them, and my work was important to me, but it was 15 hours a week. And that was it. And then it was very contained and boundary. And that was great. Now, as part of my ambition has kind of shifted into this place of impact, I work a lot more, and that's okay too, right? It's just different parts of my same story.
So I think one of the things that would be really interesting to get your take on here, actually, just to help people unpack that a bit more, is like, how do you actually define ambition? What is ambition to you?
It's a drive. I think that's the word I so often link it to, is drive. And again, drive tends to be one we equate with success, but drive is just that push, that internal knowing that this is the thing that I want more of in my life. And I think when we are really clear that drive is coming, again, from something internal, it feels very, very different. But if we can kind of think of it as want or drive, then sometimes that could open up a little more flexibility about how we define it.
Yeah. I really like that framing, and it feels much more accessible. Ambition is definitely something that feels very lofty. It feels very big. Some people might say that their personality isn't ambitious, as if it's like a character trait. You either are or you aren't. And so I think a lot of people can get stuck in a story that they tell about themselves as being ambitious or not being ambitious, and that almost reinforcing some self-doubts they have about themselves when they view it through that lens. But when you start to view it as something like, I just really want this thing, I'm really driven to achieve this thing, be that more time with my kids, or be it that very senior role, whatever, it doesn't matter, then that gives it some, I think, a bit more clarity, and it's universal then. Like, everybody wants different things and all of them have value. That's another thing I really like about the way that you frame it.
Yeah. And I think, women have a complicated relationship with the word ambition, right? Because, it's kind of a dirty word, right? Especially when we combine it with motherhood, right? Ambition in motherhood is selfish. How dare you want something outside of this beautiful gift you've been given? And motherhood is beautiful. It's wonderful. And you get to have things you want outside of that. And in fact, it's better for your kids if you do have something more than motherhood, right? Because in the end, that's actually a lot of pressure to put on your kids, right? If you say my entire world is my children and their happiness, what if you're not happy? Right? What if they want to do something that you don't necessarily approve of, when they pick a career? That's putting them in a really tough spot, right? And so to say, let's reclaim ambitious as a good thing for moms, and whether that's through work or other means, I think we have come in some ways, hopefully a long way from the choice of lean in or stay at home. And there's a lot more options. And, I want all of those options to be on the table and for all of them to be seen as valuable.
So One of the things that's kind of cropping up in my mind as you're talking is just circling back a little bit to this idea of privilege, because I feel very conscious in all of the conversations that I have that there isn't a certain amount of privilege involved in being able to even ask yourselves these questions. Like, some people just have to work, right? They just cannot ask themselves the question about whether they like it or not. It is a need to have. It's not nice to have. What are some of the ways that women who find themselves in a position that they feel is non-negotiable, like there's no wiggle room, like what are some of the small things that people can do in those situations to kind of tune into their own sense of ambition or tune into their own needs or desires a bit more?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. And I will say, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm very aware of that dynamic too. And that's part of why I've moved into doing some of this more consulting oriented work, because I want working parents and working mothers to have support at all levels, not just the ones that can afford to pay for it themselves. Like, I want that support to be in the workplace. I want workplaces to be a part of the new village that we have raising kids, right?
Yes.
So that moms can show up and provide for their families. And so I think the second part of that is recognizing, okay, maybe you're listening to this and you're like, my ambition is to be at home with my kids and I've got to work because I got to pay the bills or I need the health insurance or whatever. I think that when we feel stuck, trying to access any amount of autonomy or choice can be, there are three things that help: context, connection, and choice. So context is understanding the why, right? Like, why am I here? What has happened in my life that's gotten me to this moment? And as part of that, what are the systemic issues, right? It's maybe what's not a me problem, but what's the system issues. Just getting an understanding of the why can be a bit of a stress reliever. Just understanding this isn't me, this is a systems issue, is huge. Connecting with other women. That's why I run groups. There is something so incredibly powerful. Again, whether you're in my working moms group as someone who has to work or because you want to work, to be with other moms that are working and who get it and who understand and say, yes, me too, and have maybe slightly different perspectives. It's within our first meeting and certainly within the first couple meetings, I just see these like beautiful supportive connections formed in the group, out of the group. When we know that someone else is kind of with us, back to being a social species, it's like a balm. Even if you're unhappy or something's really hard, when there's someone in the hard with you, it changes things. So connection and then choice. Where do I have some autonomy? Where do I have some ability? And sometimes the only choice we have is our mindset. But one mindset shift you can make is, I'm ambitious to provide for my family. I want to give my kids things that they have not been able to access before. Again, money is not a bad thing to be ambitious for. Providing for your family is not a bad thing to be ambitious for. Yeah. It's a wonderful thing, right? To give your children a safe home and a roof over their heads. And when you can start to at least see it that way, then there might be a little more room for creative thinking around, okay, well, what if I hate this job and I don't want to work at all? Are there other things that I could move to that would feel better? But so that you don't feel like you're kind of working against yourself, you're working with yourself.
Yeah, and having a sense of pride in, even if it doesn't feel good, like you don't really enjoy it and it feels like an obligation, but feeling pride in the fact that you're showing up and doing it anyway, and that you're doing it for reasons that you are ambitious about. I think that's a really powerful mindset shift to make. And I'm sure that actually all of us at some stage in our life kind of need to remind ourselves to do that work, because oftentimes like that mindset shift can be the most powerful tool we have in our toolkit when things feel really difficult. And not to say that, just think differently. I know it's not as easy as that, but it's just that we do have that power, especially when things feel very, very stuck.
Yeah. And the other thing I'd add that I hear from a lot of women is like, especially if they don't want to be working, but even if they do, is this fear of like, well, and is it bad for the kids that I'm working, that I'm right? Is it like, that's the other side of this. And the data is pretty clear that no, right? I mean, there have been literal time studies where they look at the amount of hours moms spend with their kids and outcomes, and the amount of time is pretty much irrelevant. It's about the quality of time when you do get time with your kids. It's about the warmth. They don't, do they have many adults that are warm and attuned and a positive attachment figures? It doesn't just have to be mom, right? And even when they look longitudinally, children of working moms are just as happy as children of non-working moms. Children of working moms actually tend to have more egalitarian attitudes towards work and home labor. But other than that, right, and they actually tend to make more money in the end. But other than that, there's not a huge difference in outcomes when we kind of look over the course of time. And so I think that's the other thing to remember, like providing for your kids and working is not hurting them. The only thing that, potentially hurts them is if you are miserable and kind of, and depressed and not accessing care, like those kinds of things we want to have people get support around, but the work itself is not the problem.
That's such an important reminder. I definitely, have been guilty of really falling into the trap of like, my children should be at home with me. They shouldn't be in daycare. It's so wrong to leave them. And it's just like this story that you sort of build out that is so unfounded because, you get home and your kids are happy. It's that tension, isn't it? Between the things you think you should be doing as a mother and the things you feel you want to do as a mother. And sometimes they might not be on the same planet, let alone the same page.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is an experience of being a working mother. I mean, a mother in general, but in particularly a working mother, of just constantly having your heart kind of split in two. And to just acknowledge that that's going to be part of the experience. And that's okay, right? To both want to be doing good work and wanting to be maybe home with your kids more than you are, and to acknowledge that you might miss things in either way. But, I think there's this message of like, if you're, savor it because they're going to grow up so fast, right? Or be present all the time because you'll miss it when they're older. And what I tell people is you're going to miss it when they're older, no matter what you do. Yes, right? I can say that I would give anything to hold my kids as babies again. That's not because I wasn't present when they were babies. That's not because I wasn't home enough. It's because it's gone, right? You miss things that you loved when they are gone. That is part of love, right? Yes. And so, I miss that because it was a wonderful experience in some ways. And there are parts of it I do not miss. But that, again, me missing it couldn't have been prevented by parenting in a different way. And I really like parenting teens and tweens in a way that I never expected. And I'm probably going to miss elements of this, right, when they are adults, and also love elements of parenting adult children. It's always going to be both.
So what does ambition look like for you now in this season of life?
That's a great question. I would say right now, I think it's kind of fun and play a little bit. The past 2 years in my career, I've been, so again, back to what we were saying, like from some outside views, it might look like I'm throwing spaghetti at the wall and just seeing what sticks, but it is a little bit of like, hey, I'm going to try this thing and see how it feels. I'm going to do this I'm going to say yes to this project and see what I like about it or don't like about it. I joked that my midlife crisis is writing a book, right? I had this inner kind of feeling of I want to write a book, and I started playing with the idea over a year. And, now here it is. It's almost done, almost into the publisher. So it's been kind of a playfulness with my career and with my kids, right? Like they are at an age where we can play games and we can travel together and do things that are really interactive. So trying to have a lot of fun. That is my ambition currently.
And like, what a great perspective to have. And there is so much research as well about the power of play, isn't there? Like in how much you get from play in terms of understanding yourself, creative thinking, critical thinking, like all of it, when it's powered by joy and play and curiosity, you kind of can achieve things that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to. So what a wonderful position to sort of be in right now, where you feel like you're experiencing that in your work. I'm curious, you've touched upon your book a little bit, and I would just love to hear a bit more about that. Like what's the central focus of the book, and what's it called, and what do you dive into?
Yeah, it's so the working title, we'll see if it sticks, is The Ambition Paradox. But it really is looking at so much of what we just talked about, right? At the experience of being a working mother in the current day and age. And the ambition paradox is basically articulating that sense of no matter what I do, I can't get it right from the outside. Right, from those external factors in terms of work and motherhood. And really, I walk readers on this journey of, to some extent, that context and the choice pieces, right, of how did we get here? what is happening societally, culturally in this moment. I talk a lot in that section about the escalation of modern motherhood and the expectations that mothers are under. And I've watched this shift pretty dramatically. My sister is 10 years older than me, so her kids were 10 years older than my children. Experience as a mother versus my own are just worlds apart. And so talking about that. And then I talk about the motherhood advantage. And so, so often we hear about the motherhood penalty at work, and that's very real economically, but I kind of turn that on its head and talk about how motherhood actually can make us better at our jobs and more impactful and more ambitious. And then I talk about this shifting from unhealthy striving to healthy striving. And then I end it with a section on some of those systemic issues, right? What is kind of in the big picture holding us back, and how can men help? How can workplaces help? How can we shift the system too? Because this isn't, so often books talk just about what mothers need to do to change, and they can't be the only ones, right? Like this is not actually about us in some ways. It is about dismantling some of the bigger picture systems, and then dismantling how those systems exist in our heads. And that's that shift, right? From unhealthy striving to healthy striving, is getting that system out and really turning inward instead.
It sounds fantastic. Okay, well, I will watch with bated breath, and I just a huge congratulations, because it's no mean feat to write a book.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, actually. I've really enjoyed the process. So,
well, let's wrap up with a very quick fire round.
Okay.
So if you could give just one piece of advice or reassurance to any mum who feels she's fallen off the ladder and isn't sure where to turn next, what would that piece of advice be?
Tell her to zoom out. And what I mean by that is that, I think I said earlier that if you can kind of picture the ladder is just one tiny part of this web. So maybe you just moved to a new section, right? And it's okay to say, I'm going to sit here and have my, my pretzels in my juice box like some of the other kids, and rest. Rest is a vital part of ambition. And then when you feel up to it, you can pick a different direction to climb in.
Great. Now, what is something that you have stopped chasing?
Probably a lifetime of working on this, but approval at this point, right? I mean, and I have just stopped caring what other people think.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think I've really stopped chasing any sort of approval and decided I'm just doing things that feel good for me and feel aligned with what I need and want and what my family needs and wants.
Oh, that's amazing. And another really hard one to do, especially as a woman, I think.
Yes. It's been a lot of inner work to get there.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then just lastly, what's something you're making space for now?
For pausing. Like I said, I think I'm working on the pause at the moment, because I am so excited about all of the things that I'm doing that I will sometimes forget that I need to take a nap, or that I should probably eat something or whatever.
Yeah.
And am in like excited go, go, go mode. And so I'm trying to make space for saying, you know what? Let's wait on that. Just hold on a minute. Take a nap, go play a board game with your kids, like do something that is more quiet and still, and have that as part of the experience too, so that you can sustain this over the long haul.
Exactly. Then come back even more energized, right?
Exactly.
And then just lastly, where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
If they want to find me online, I'm on LinkedIn most days at Dr. Ann Welsh. And also they can find all sorts of information about me on my website, which is drannwelsh.com. And I love to hear from listeners. If you have questions or something resonated with you and you want to shoot me a DM on LinkedIn or email, I'd love to hear it and love to connect with people. So that's where you can find me.
Amazing. And I'll put all of that into the show notes as well, so that people can quickly kind of navigate to the various places that you hang out online.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's been really, really fascinating. And I'm, like I said, excitedly going to see where the next year or two takes you, because it sounds like there's a lot of really exciting things ongoing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was a really, really fun conversation.
Likewise. Well, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.